K-Ming, you're welcome.
Great.
Hi there, my name is Jay Pontieri, and I'm the director of low residency creative writing at PNCA. Before I say more, I'm going to read a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land we are located rests on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, bands of the Chinook, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, dislocation, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous families today. As settlers and guests on these lands, we respect the work of Native nations and First Peoples, leaders and families, and make ongoing efforts to center Indigenous knowledge, creativity, resilience, and resistance. We acknowledge that this acknowledgement is not enough and is one of many steps leading towards the more active, essential task of the rematriation of Native lands. I'm going to introduce one of the co-directors of the Independent Publishing Resource Center, also known as the IPRC, Harper Quinn.
Hi everyone, welcome. Actually, I'm going to sit as well. I'm so delighted to have you all here. My name is Harper Quinn, she, her. I'm one of the co-leaders or co-directors here at the Independent Publishing Resource Center. Before I tell you about what the IPRC is, I know that some of you may be wondering where the restrooms are. So a little bit of housekeeping. It is through the blue door in the back, past the bathtub, to the right. There is a little alley with a kind of kitchenette. So if you've gotten to the dock door, you've missed the restrooms. But I'm not recognizing a lot of folks, which is really exciting. And I'm also really delighted to be hosting PNCA, which in many ways feels like a partner organization. And the IPRC, where we are, we've been around for over 20 years, and we're a shared community organization and print shop. So a lot of the resources that you all have at PNCA, if you are looking for a continuing community and to have access to a lot of those really wonderful resources, we're champions of print ephemera, creative writing. We have workshops, and I can tell you about membership and how you can be a part of the community too. So feel free to ask me questions, ask me anything. And I'm so delighted for the reading here tonight. I think this is one of the first readings that we've had since at the IPRC since the pandemic. So it's really, really, really special to come together again. Thank you so much.
So tonight, the reading will be Emceed by Justin Dewyow, and it's Justin's final MC event for the low residency creative writing program. We are going to celebrate Justin a little tomorrow, but let's give Justin Dewyow a hand.
Wow, I did not realize this is the last one. Yeah, I'll take this seriously, I guess. Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be with you all tonight. Yeah, this is a wonderful evening. I'm excited to share it with you. And I'm even more excited to introduce LaTanya McQueen, who's our first reader of the evening. LaTanya is the recipient of grants from the Endowment of the Arts and the Elizabeth George Foundation. She's the author of 2 books, the essay collection, And It Begins Like This for Black and White Press, and the novel When the Reckoning Comes by Harper Perennial. Her stories and essays have been published in West Branch, Tri-Quarterly, Pleiades, New Ohio Review, the Arkansas International, the Florida Review, Bennington Review, Passages North, Black Warrior Review, 14 Hills, the North American Review, Ninth Letter, New Orleans Review, Indiana Review, and other journals, as well as having won the Disquiet Prize for Nonfiction, the Walker Percy Prize for Fiction, and the Best of the Net for Nonfiction. She received her MFA from Emerson College, her PhD from the University of Missouri, was the 2017 to 2018 Robert P. Dana Emerging Writer Fellow at Cornell College, and currently is an assistant professor of English creative writing and African American Studies at Coe College. She's also the CNF editor for Gigantic Sequins and associate editor for Story Magazine, and is on the board for Iowa City's UNESCO City of Literature. So join me in welcoming LaTanya.
Sit and do this, so I'm just gonna here. I think this is the first time we're like little lights for me, so it's nice. It's very intimate. Thank you all for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be with you all this week. I really feel inspired, honored. I've just had a really good experience being with you, so I just want to thank you. Maybe I shouldn't touch it. I'm not breaking. A couple of things. Something I've been thinking about with creative nonfiction lately is how we're asked often to, whenever we're doing a reading, to consistently revisit our traumas and revisit the memories of them, and I've been thinking about the potential damage of that. At the same time, though, I've been thinking about the ways with nonfiction, reading nonfiction, that act of writing it, act of sharing it, can be an act of healing, a way to bring visible what's been invisible, to voice what's been unvoiced, to speak as an act of reclaiming. So I'm going to read an essay. It hasn't been published. I'm not sure if I ever will publish it, but it's important for me to read it today. I do wonder, though, by reading not just this, but just sort of reading any kind of nonfiction in general, how much am I reinscribing my trauma, but then also too, how much of me is desperately trying to hold on to it, to remember it. And so with that in mind, I say, I'll return it. This is a story about 2 broken people, told from the person trying to forget, while the other being someone who already has. Before I begin, I must mention that I am unsure anymore what is or isn't true. Because I don't trust my memory, I am not sure I can trust my own telling of these events, since it is difficult sometimes to distinguish between a thing that happened versus what I wanted to have happened. The problem is with my memory. There are huge pieces of my life I don't remember, and there continue to be gaps. And I am never sure if this is just a symptom of getting older or perhaps stress or something else entirely. Something else entirely would be how in college I got bacterial meningitis, resulting in a seizure that put me in a coma that when I finally woke from, I discovered that a lot of my memories from before were gone. I've resisted writing about this and for years rarely mentioned it because a person wants to believe they are fine, that they are not damaged beyond repair. And I've never known quite how to talk about what happened because how does one even begin to talk about what's been lost? I'll start to say I once cared for someone who I knew would not care for me. Perhaps that was why I did care for them, because they were grieving, because their grief consumed them, because I knew they would never let it go, and because deep down I never wanted them to. I once cared for someone who now I would like to forget. Not just forget them, but forget everything that happened between us, everything said and done, forget every memory if I could, if it was possible. This is a story about the long arc of grief and how it can affect a person's life for years, decades after the fact, and how even when a person has convinced themselves they are whole, it can show itself in unexpected ways, reminding you that it is not done, that grief never is done. I don't know how to talk about all of what's been lost. Because my mother purged a lot of her belongings after her divorce and then purged further when she learned about her cancer, I have little mementos left of her. I can count on my hands the things of hers I now own. Her wedding ring tucked in a red box kept in my closet. Her childhood Bible embossed in gold with her name, the pages inside worn from use. A collection of metal spoons from places she visited, each one engraved with the city she bought them from. A few remaining pieces of her wedding china. And her nightgown, folded and sealed inside a plastic bag that I would sometimes open to smell the fragrance of the cream she used that still lingered on the fabric. But when the smell faded, I tucked the gown back inside and never opened it again. After she died, the man who said he would always love my mother gathered up the belongings he kept of hers, along with her urn, and drove a day's drive to my father's to get rid of them, explaining afterward he was going back to his wife, the woman he'd left my mother for, and she didn't want any reminders. I wonder if this was his way of forgetting, to purge himself of these objects of my mother's, to purge himself of her in order to move on and let go. This is all I have of her, these remaining possessions, all that remains of the life she lived. Except, of course, for my memories, most of which hurt to remember, but without them, I fear my mother would disappear. Because tell me, if not for memory, what remains? What happened, in short, was I remembered. And because I remembered, I said yes when you invited me over to sit and eat the meals given to you by others, grief meals I called them, though never to your face. And I ate your meals, and after they were gone, I helped you with new ones. What happened was I wanted to make your life easier, and I would say yes, and sometimes you'd ask me to pick up things, little things at first, like an item you needed for a recipe, a snack for us to eat while we waited for dinner. But then when it became takeout food brought after work, I said yes to that too. And while you prepared dinner, I would play with your children, read them stories, and I would listen to them as they told me theirs. What happened was I wanted to do good. I tried to be what I thought I'd want in the same situation, which was someone who didn't offer what felt like empty words of condolences, someone who wouldn't ask how I was doing because they could never know, someone who would make life a little easier so that for a moment I could forget. What happened was I wanted to be for you what was never done for me. No one's grief is the same, and And so we can never know what it's been like for another as it has been for ourselves. Still, I knew only to say yes. Yes to visits over, yes to dinners, yes to staying a little longer, always the ask of a little longer, with them grabbing my legs, sometimes pleading, and my answer was always yes to all of you, because who was I to deny some joy if something as simple as staying would give it? So always I stayed. You once asked me if I would stay here with you, and by this you meant this town, this place, and it felt at the time the kind of ask one changes their life around, because wasn't it? While you hadn't said it, I thought that it might mean something more, to stay in this makeshift sort of life we'd fallen into, and what felt like a makeshift sort of family. Part of me knew it wasn't real, but it was the closest thing to a sense of family I'd felt in a long time, and I thought, I wonder if it could be enough. Picture the child, known as a good little boy, calm in disposition, who never cried when his mother left him for a few hours. This child, however, had an occasional disturbing habit of taking any small objects he gets hold of and throwing them away from him into a corner under the bed. And as he did this, gave vent to a loud, long drawn out, oh, 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 accompanied by an expression of interest and satisfaction. Later, the child would take a reel that had a piece of string tied around it, tossing the reel away where it couldn't be seen, and then pulling it back into view while yelling, "Dog, gone. There," the child would explain, the word "court, dog," as he played his game. Often, Freud stressed, this act of the court part of the game was enough, and it was repeated untiringly by the boy in what was possibly his attempts at mastering a painful experience, his mother's absence, by reproducing it in his game. Repetition compulsion, Freud called this tendency of someone to expose themselves repeatedly to a painful situation while having forgotten the origins for the compulsion. With this, a person cannot remember the whole of what is repressed in him and is obliged to repeat the repressed material as a contemporary experience instead of remembering it as something belonging to the past. I wonder now how much of you and I was us playing our own fort dog game, how much of who we were to each other was an attempt at replaying a trauma each of us has tried to forget. With anyone else, I would have drawn a line, said no, and yet I didn't. I wonder if it was the same for you, if you too felt a moment of reprieve, even if false, and I sometimes wonder if, however subconsciously, this was what we were both asking for, if in our knowing of each other, we were reinscribing what was lost. When I look back, this was the moment I now realize where things changed for me, and it happened with this idea of staying, of being asked, and inherent in the question was the understanding that yes, you would too. If I let myself remember, I get connected back to my mother and all the times I pleaded to God after every one of her hospital visits because of her lupus, and then later because of her heart attacks, and then later because of the cancer, for her to stay on this earth a little longer, and yet despite my fervent pleading, she died. Or to my father for his affairs, his eventual leaving, not just her, but me as well, leaving us both during all the years of my childhood where we were left to struggle alone. Or to the man my mother met later in her life, who said he loved her, wanted to marry her, who left his own wife to be with her, who took care of her when she got cancer when no one else would, who said he would always love her, who I thought would mourn her forever. Then after she died, soon went back to the wife he left because in the end he couldn't be alone. If I allowed it, I could connect it to 100 hurts and all the losses I've been made to bear that have led me to this decision I never should have made. You asked me to stay, and perhaps when you asked, you never meant for such depths of my commitment, but I made then a promise that you'd never meant to ask for, and while I knew that I shouldn't, that it was unfair to everyone involved, I made it anyway. Not only would I stay, but I would be there, doing anything I could, anything you needed, being for you what no one was for my mother, being for your family what no one ever was for me. Of course, you never meant to stay, and you waited until the decision had been made before telling me you were leaving, waiting until the last possible moment because you knew I would take it poorly. You said it was to spare my feelings, but was it that or an attempt at not wanting to deal with either of ours? But to be a human who exists in this world means you must consider others' feelings, that it can't just be about you, and it means you have to acknowledge how your actions affect others. This was the last thing I said to you, hastily written on a note card, mailed to you after you were gone. What does it mean when even I, the person who loved my mother most, am forgetting her? The little I have left of her exists in memories, most of which hurt to remember, but without them, I fear my mother would disappear. What I struggle with now is the differentiation between what was true and what I want to be, what I try not to remember, and what struggles to come back to the surface. The story my mother used to tell my father left us both. In this story, my mother blames him for years of our instability, of the poverty we endured, because he did not fulfill his obligation as a parent. My father tells a different story, reminding me of all the times I call asking for money, and wouldn't I always send it, he always responds. To my mother, my father was the man who left her, and growing up, men were always leaving. She would meet men who viewed her, a single woman with a small child, as vulnerable, easy to be used and left behind, and the men who came into her life did just that. I would often wish how just once one of them would stay. I am always questioning the truth and things that happened and now the people I've known. The best I can explain is to tell the story of how a few years ago when I went home to visit, my father played some old audio recordings, and as I listened to the voice, he asked me if I recognized it. When I told him no, asking him who it was, he told me it was my mother. I had forgotten my mother's voice, a voice where, if I were to recall it from memory, feels so clear, yet when played back to me, feels like one of a stranger. Do you remember when? My father would begin, always asking, and his question is the desire for me to remember when he was there, before he left my mother, before he left us, and he would tell a story lost in his own reverie of remembering, always ending with the question to me, and each time I have to answer no, that what he yearns for has long been gone. There is more to the story between me and your mother, my father once said, and one day, maybe you will let me tell mine. Your story was to say how it was money problems that made you leave, that it was not an attempt at running away. You will say you never meant to hurt me. You will say you never meant to lead me on. You will say we were just friends, right? That's all I wanted, all I want now. You will say how you'll never be whatever it is I am wanting. You will say how, despite everything, it was a surprise to learn how I felt about you. You will say that you've never been good at interpreting other people's feelings. You will say it was never your intention to attempt at replicating a sense of family. You said once that I was the closest person in your life, and even after all of this, you still say this is true. I don't know what's true anymore. Did my care for you come from my own fear of forgetting? Did it come from a desire for what was lost, or what I can't remember having, or what I never had? Did I care for you because you did what no one would do for my mother, which was love someone even after their death, choosing not to forget, to remember, to not move on? Did I care for you because deep down I knew you would never feel the same for me, and thus through you enacting the same experiences as my mother in my way of not forgetting her? Was this all an attempt at me repeating the story of what's familiar, one of loss, of being alone, always performing the same story I've always known. The thing about time is that with it, the pain lessens, but so too does the memory, and you are already disappearing. The longer time goes, the less I remember, and the more I question what I do. Soon, a day will come where the fragments that remain will feel like pieces of a dream, remembered in the same way as a wish unfulfilled. I've forgotten my mother. Every day since her death, I've lost another part of the memory of her, and I feel as if I am forgetting you. I forget, then I don't have to live with the pain of remembering. This is both what I was afraid of and what I want now. And yet, there was a moment that now seems so long ago, with you and me and them, all of us together, and it was New Year's Eve, and we were sitting on the sofa waiting for the time to count down, waiting on a new beginning. And we sat there together underneath a blanket, the fabric itching my skin, but I didn't mind. And they had fallen asleep for a bit. One of them had their head on my lap, the other on my shoulder, and it struck me in that moment to imagine that this might be what a family is, what it's like to have one. And my heart filled with such a yearning, and I thought of how this could be happiness. And maybe in retrospect, it was false, not real, but in the moment it felt like something, and I wanted to remember it. And still now there is the desire to hold on to this moment, so ordinary, but it is always the most ordinary moments you later want to keep, because those are the moments most representative of life, of living. And I think now of what I thought then, if this is the closest I'll ever get, then I will take it. So please just let me have this ordinary moment of perfection. Please just let me have this, whether real or not, it doesn't matter. The rest of it doesn't matter anymore. This memory will be enough. If I can hold on to it, let me remember it a little longer. Please don't let me forget. For as long as I can let myself remember, please, I'll say over and over my own prayer. And I am a child once again, asking for what she'll never have. And yet still I call for it. Still I say over and over, please just let me remember. If I can have nothing else, then let me have at least this.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. It is my pleasure to introduce K-Ming Chang, who will be sharing her work next. K-Ming Chang is a Kundiman Fellow, a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. She's the author of the New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice novel, Bestiary, by One World and Random House, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and the Penn Faulkner Award. In 2021, her chapbook, Bone House, was published by Bull City Press. Her short story collection, Gods of Want, is forthcoming from One World, as well as a novel titled Oregon Meets. Cheers, California.
Hi, I can't decide whether to sit or stand up. Yeah, I guess I'll just do a little both. Thank you so much for that introduction and LaTanya for such an incredible reading. I'm going to read 2 flash stories and 1 very, very tiny micro story. This first story is called Finger, and it's based on that urban legend about finding a finger, the woman who found a finger in a bowl of chili at Wendy's, which in elementary school, everyone was talking about it. We were all obsessed with this finger in a bowl of chili. We were all very envious, which I don't know what that says about us, but that's about that experience, or that legend. Finger. We hear on TV that if you find a finger in your bowl of chili at Wendy's, you can sue them and live on that money forever. We debate whose finger to sever, how we will split the money, but in the end, only one girl is willing, Gao Xiaocai, whose mother needs surgery to remove her spleen because it is hardening. What is the spleen, we ask Xiaocai. but she doesn't know either, can only make 2 fists and say this is inside her. We ask her which finger she wants to sacrifice, and she says her ring one, since she doesn't want to marry anyway. Her mother says men are worse than spleens because they can't be surgically removed from inside you. That's fine, we say, but we pity that finger, crying as we hold it down on your mother's cutting board and bringing the cleaver down blunt. Though we tie the knot around her finger the night before, choking off the blood so it will turn dead and white as a radish, Xiao Cai still screams, and we are still sorry when the cleaver doesn't go through all the way, just sort of lodges in the bone. And by the time we wrestle the blade up again, her bone flaking like snow, Xiao Cai is unconscious and her mother is awake, chasing us out. Her finger is only severed partway, and now it has an extra hinge in it. And though we think she looks way cooler this way, like those ghosts with hands as long as their arms that can eat a tree with 1 fist, her mother is upset because now Xiao Cai is unmarriageable. Xiao Cai says she has to drink a bag of pig's blood every day because of blood loss. And because we are sorry, we buy her jumbo bags at the Dahua and watch her sip, her wrists bulging full, shattering her bracelets and scattering the bone beads we scramble to pluck off the sheet. We will find another thing to amputate, maybe a toe, because who needs those? Xiao Cai says she has an uncle without toes, and maybe we can ask him for advice. He must live in a house beneath his own acre of sky, rain whenever he wants it, the sun dinging like a concierge bell. But Xiao Cai says no, his uncle lives in his Subaru. We tell her we don't believe that, but Xiao Cai brings us to the Burger King parking lot and asks him to show us his feet. It's true, he says, I lost my toes, but not inside a stew. During the revolution, I was sent to Qinghai to herd cattle, and all the women said, remember to sleep with your feet buried in coal. And I forgot, and my toes purpled like grapes and were plucked off clean by the cold. But I kept my teeth, he says, smiling, and they are turrets of gold. Every part of him is gilded, skin described by sweat, hands ruby with calluses. We tell him he should have kept all his toes in a baggie and tucked them into a cheeseburger, and then he'd be so rich his bones would be re-released in gold. And he laughs and says they burned his toes, converted them to coals. We ask him if he has collected them back yet. No, he says, and asks us why we want them. We say we are going to spoon them to our mouths and scream and sue, and then we will pay to evict Xiao Cai's mother's spleen, and we will buy pink houses that look like sliced cake, and holographic skirts, and a new Subaru that can go underwater like a submarine and resurface him anywhere he wants. He laughs again. He says, does a finger cost so much here? When I was little, he says, little girls didn't roam the streets looking for cold toes, didn't hijack cleavers either. What do they do then, we ask, and he says, they used to fly kites. Kites with faces on them to scare ghosts away, kites with our faces. Back then, he tells us, he had a sister just like us, except one time she got her kite tangled in a power line, and when she tried to tug it down, she got electrocuted. They tried to take her home, but no one could touch her without snagging themselves in her light. And by the time she stopped shaking, she was dead. We had to carry her home without touching her, muffled in wool, he says. How much money did you get, we ask, for her whole body like that? We think it must be a lot, but he turns away from us, putting his hands on the wheel, even though we are going nowhere. Nothing, he says, nothing. That's when Xiao Cai gets the idea to dig up a dead body and steal the fingers off that. And this way, none of our blood has to be replaced with the pig's. We agree, and all week we dig beneath power lines for electrocuted girls, but we only find soda cans, pigeon bones, gravel. Xiao Cai's mother's belly turns green because the spleen is now a honeydew melon, and though Xiao Cai begs us to finish severing her finger, we see the way it hinges, knuckling like a tree beneath another country's wind, and we cannot fell it. Xiao Cai's uncle follows us in his car as we walk to Dewyow for pig's blood, as we plot which bodies to rob, always our own. He scrolls down his window. His car stalls behind us, shuddering still, and the window breathes steam. Freeze, he says, we freeze. He runs out toward us, kneeling, taking each of our feet one at a time and cupping them in his palms, buttering us in his breath. When we ask him to go back in the car, aren't you cold out here? Don't spend all your blood on us. But he kneels, holding our feet to his lips like a microphone, saying again and again, Someday you will be worth more than this. You will be worth more than what you've lost. Sorry. And this next story is called Gloria. Gloria Gall was the first girl I ever hurt. I punched her in the face for calling my family a bunch of dirty mainlanders. I was Taiwanese like her too, but just half on my mother's side, which meant the other half of my family must be made up of organ sellers, gutter spitters, and serial gamblers. It was true I had an uncle who stabbed another man twice during a card game in the basement of a pet store. It was true my grandfather won my grandmother in a game of mahjong, along with a flute that he demonstrated how to play by prodding the mouth tip into his ass and farting into it. Gloria was a church girl. She thought she was better than us because she had dime-sized nipples and an almost new Navy Honda. She prayed every day, and her tongue must have been tuned into the right frequency because hers always came true. She prayed for her own pocket radio when she was 9, and the next day they were growing from the sycamores like silver-skinned fruit, batteries falling out of the sky in a gunmetal rain. Then there was the time she prayed for the moles on her nose to be evicted from her skin, and the next day they fled her face as horseflies. My grandfather went to the temple twice in his life, once to pray for the lottery numbers to arrive as the number of birds in the sky, once to pray I'd be born a boy. Both prayers were returned to sender. After he died, we pickled his ashes in a jar of rice vinegar and left him there as a lantern. Gloria Gall wore a jade cross and skirts with overlapping layers like the bell of a tulip, and she was so thin I could see her bones go stealth beneath her skin. She had a mouth like a Ming Dynasty poem, weaned off cream and perfectly circular, and when she prayed, which was all the time, wherever she was, she lowered her head and muttered, forcing us all to watch her fold. The neighborhood girls and I joked to her that she probably kneeled more than a prostitute. There were things we did to bend her faith like a fishbone, like stealing the side view mirrors off her Honda while she was at church, or sending her a text that read 666 every day for a month. But she remained above us all, a self-appointed saint. She was pristine as an apple, and we all wanted to skin her. I've never seen the inside of a church, but I imagine it's swollen with light, nothing like the temple where I went once to visit my grandfather. His name was pasted to the wall for the first 100 days after death. Inside the temple, it was dark and damp, like the inside of a plum, a pit pulsing down my throat. I couldn't look at his name, the one he gave me, the one I didn't say, the one Gloria called dirty. In the back of the room was a Buddha sitting cross-legged, shoulders slumped, face shedding gold paint, a chipped nose that reminded me of the time I punched Gloria, the sap of blood on my knuckles, the sweet. Her bottom lip unzipped against my fist. Her knees ducked to the street. Take this from me, I wanted to say. Pray for me to stop. I'll answer to my name in your mouth. Gloria got a chaste boyfriend, a church boy. The neighborhood girls and I planted $31 in his pocket, along with a note urging him to get it in and bring us proof when he did. God designed me to do this, we wrote, and he obeyed, bringing us her underwear dangling from his maw like a dog. We were disappointed by the plainness of them, no lace waistband to tattle on, no little satin bow, not even a pattern of cherries or hearts. They looked unworn, the kind of white that meant her mother owned a washing machine and didn't scrub the family's underwear in a sink with a stone shaped like a fist, the way our mothers did. We knew then that we would never dirty her. I saw her alone once in the parking lot of the church. It was true I was following her, true that I thought of kidnapping the family's beagle, so that I'd see her again on her knees, searching for something. But I knew she was the kind to leash her losses and walk them down the street like shining beasts, so I left the dog alone. In the parking lot of the church, I saw her sit in the driver's seat of her almost new Honda, put her hands on the wheel, and go nowhere. It was dark, and no one knew where she was. The light was on in her back seat. I wanted to wear that light, so I knocked on the car window. She rolled it down and told me to go away, but instead I got in beside her, told her it was dangerous to sit in an unlocked car. Her glove box was open, and inside I could see the sweet beads of a rosary and something that glistened behind it, a gun. She saw me looking and said it was for protection, that when her father first came to America, he worked on a farm and shot pigs and strung them up, unbuttoning their skin. I told her there weren't any pigs here. I didn't know her mouth was capable of making that word, pig, and I pulled it from the air like a pin. That night, she tried to teach me the word of God. She asked me if I had ever felt his love. But all I could think about was her father with a pig slung across his shoulders, the satin shawl of its blood. In the back seat, she saddled my face, came in my mouth, knotted my wrists with ribbons of salt. I saw her nipples, and they were ordinary, not currency, no faces minted into them. I hated how perfectly plotted her spine was, her symmetrical shadow, how she rummaged light from the whites of my eyes, how faithful I was to the taste of her. This is the last story. I didn't realize that both stories ended with like car scenes. I only realized that now after reading them both back to back. But this is a really short micro story, the last one. It's called Extinction. Right, let's go. I'll just keep going, it's fine. Extinction. But the thing is, now that I've mentioned it, I can hear it even louder. Okay, there it goes. I'll just go. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. Sorry. I feel like I drew attention to it. I was like, now everyone listen. Everyone listen to the train as it goes by. Okay, thank you so much. Extinction. The headlines that summer, all whales exhibiting signs of lesbianism. Scientists worldwide were distressed by the possible extinction of whales and tried all different ways to inseminate the females. By injection of sperm, by introducing mates into their territory, which frequently resulted in lethal fights, by releasing hormones into the ocean with a syringe the size of a submarine, by training members of the human species to learn whale song and impersonate suitors, by introducing inflatable whale-sized dildos to entice them, by labeling whales out of the ocean and into tanks so that they could be more closely studied, by performing surgeries, unspooling their intestines like lengths of ribbon, securing brain and bone samples, asking animal psychologists to question why now? Are they suicidal? Do they no longer care about the continuation of their species? Have they inherited the human quality of selfishness? Do they have a language for loneliness, singing and giving birth alone for so many millennia? Are they like the animals that return to die in the same place they give birth? What do they do with their umbilical cords? Do they knot the cords into nooses or bury them on the seafloor or eat them raw like eels? Do they surface to breathe or to watch us? Do they know the concept of drowning? Do they think the sea is as endless as we do, the depths we have never touched with our tongues? That we wonder about the dark. We wonder what it means to live inside it, in a place where light goes extinct. What do whales drink? Does thirst exist in their vocabulary? Does desire? That story.
K-Ming, that was so great. Thank you, LaTanya. Let's give LaTanya and K-Ming another round of applause. Just wanted to thank Kia and Justin for their help. Really helping me keep it together. We are tuned right now, by the way, in day 10. So thank you, Kia. Thank you, Justin. And then let's just thank the IPRC. Thank you all. All right. We have our second group of MFA candidates reading. Leah Herzing, Rachel Keller, and Manya Orescan Campos at 7 p.m. at PNCA and followed by graduation. So we'll see you there.